What we're going to do now is graph quadratics in vertex form. When we're looking at vertex form, what we have is y equals a. A is the value that tells us whether the graph opens up or it opens down. So a positive a value gives us a graph that looks kind of like a U, and a negative a value gives us a graph that looks more like an N. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to find our vertex. Since it's in vertex form, it's really easy. It's always the opposite of the value inside and the number outside. That's why our vertex is HK. Then we're going to look for the pattern for A, and the pattern is going to be A over 1. It's going to be rise over run. Then we're going to plot the points and graph. Now, one step on here that I didn't put is the axis of symmetry. We don't really need the axis of symmetry to graph it, but our axis of symmetry is x equals h. And what that is a imaginary line that goes down and it crosses the vertex. And it tells us that the points are symmetric. And that's really helpful. We don't write it in, but that is helpful in us understanding how the graph goes. So looking at example 1, oh, and then I forgot, we have to talk about the domain, which is really easy because it's always the same, negative infinity to infinity. Range is a little bit more difficult. If it's a positive a value, it goes up, k to infinity. If it's a negative a value, it goes down, negative infinity to k. So looking at our first one, what we're going to do is we see that it's positive, so we know that it opens up. Our vertex is going to be 2, negative 1. And then our a value is 1 over 1. So when we're graphing this, what we have is we have our vertex, which is 2, negative 1. And then since our a value is 1, we go up 1 to the right 1. And then it's symmetric. We talked about the axis of symmetry going through the vertex. So how it looks on one side is going to be exactly how it looks on the other. So that right there is going to be our graph. Now, when we're talking about our domain is going to be negative infinity to infinity. And our range, since it's going up, it's going to start at negative 1 and it's going to go to infinity. Notice that when we're looking at our vertex, the range starts at negative 1 and it keeps on going up. So for letter B, the negative tells us that it opens down. So we know that we have a graph going down. Our vertex, the opposite inside, so that would be negative 2 and 2. Then our a value is going to be negative 1 over 1. So when we plot this, what we're going to do is we're going to put negative 2 and 2, and then it goes negative 1 to the right 1. And remember, it's symmetric, so it's the same on the other side. And then what we're going to do is we're going to graph it. Now, when we're looking at our domain, once again, domain is really easy because it's always the same, negative infinity to infinity. Range is a little bit difficult. This time it's not going up, it's going down. So the highest point is 2. So we're going to put negative infinity all the way to 2. Notice that I put a bracket on the 2 because it actually includes it. The infinity, we never reach infinity, that's why it's a parenthesis. For the next one, our a value is 2, so it opens up. Our vertex is 1, negative 3. Our a value is going to be 2 over 1. So when we graph this, we have 1, negative 3. Oops, let me try that again. We have 1 and negative 3, and then it's going up 2. And then what we're going to do is try to make it look like a U as much as we can. Domain, once again, is really easy because it's always the same, negative infinity to infinity. It goes to the left, it goes to the right. Our range is a little bit more difficult. We see that it starts at -3 and it goes up. So that means for our range, what we have is a bracket at -3, and then it goes to infinity. So looking at letter D, first thing, we see the negative, so that tells us that it opens down. Our vertex is -3 and 4, and our a value is -1. So I'm going to put -1 over 1. So we have -3, +4. It's going down 1. And so that gives us our graph. When we're looking at our domain goes to the left, goes to the right. So that's why it's negative infinity to infinity. And then our range, notice the highest value is at 4. It's going down. So we put the negative infinity first, and then we put the 4 second. It always goes least to greatest. Letter E is a little bit different. We're going to look at our a value. It's in front of the x squared. It's positive, so that means that it opens up. Then notice that there's no parentheses. So that tells us that when we're doing the vertex, it's going to be 0, -3. It doesn't shift to the left or right. It's only going down 3. And then our a value is 1. So we have 1 over 1. So we have 0, -3. And since it goes up 1 over 1, this is what it's going to look like. And then if we're talking about the domain is going to be negative infinity to infinity, just like always. And our range is going up. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our lowest value, which is -3. And then it keeps on going up. So it goes up to infinity. And our last one, we see the -2. So that tells us that it's going down. And then our vertex is always the opposite. So -1. Notice that there's no number right here, so that would be 0. Then our a value is -2 over 1. So we have -1, 0. We're going to go down 2. We're going to go to the right and to the left. And then when we're looking at our domain, once again, it's the same, negative infinity to infinity. And then when we're looking at the range, we see that it's at 0 and it's going down. So we're going to have negative infinity all the way to 0.